Welcome everyone to another edition of the Classic Comic Archive, a series where I recap and review many of Marvel Comics' most seminal early issues. Our story for today is Uncanny X-Men Issue 2, cover dated November of 1963. This issue marks the first appearance of longtime X-Men villain, the Vanisher. The issue was written by Stan Lee, drawn by Jack Kirby, inked by Paul Reinman, and lettered by Sam Rosen. Our story opens up with 5 teenage mutant heroes known as the X-Men, as they rush back to their school after receiving an urgent mental call from their teacher Professor X, who himself is a powerful mutant telepath. The Beast, whose oversized limbs grant him ape-like agility, opts to climb up a nearby building and hop onto a passing train to make it back to the professor. Meanwhile, the Angel, whose dove-like wings grant him the ability to soar high in the sky, opts to fly back to the mansion-turned-school. Yet as he takes a moment to rest his tired wings, the hero suddenly finds himself swarmed by a group of giddy young girls. It seems that after defeating Magneto in the last issue, the X-Men have become noted celebrities, with the Angel specifically becoming somewhat of a heartthrob among teenage girls. Yet Angel only has his eyes set on one, that being Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl, the newest member of the X-Men. Using her telekinetic powers, Marvel Girl frees Angel from the swarm of teenagers by mentally raising them off of him and onto the marquee of a nearby theater. Angel returns the favor by offering to fly Marvel Girl back to the mansion, an opportunity she accepts. Nearby we see Cyclops and Iceman passing by a construction site where the two observant heroes notice a wall beginning to collapse over some construction workers, seemingly spelling their doom. Iceman thinks as much, as he remarks that he and Cyclops are simply too far away to help. Yet Cyclops won't stand for such a pessimistic response, as he dials his visor's intensity to maximum and blasts away the wall before it can do any harm. A grateful group of construction workers then rush to Cyclops and thank him for his heroic deed. Meanwhile, Iceman pulls a few of his signature pranks as he freezes the gloves of some construction workers as they shake his hand. Yet both X-Men recognize the urgency in the professor's call and hastily leave the construction workers for their school. But unlike the crafty Beast or the winged Angel, Cyclops and Iceman are left to race to the mansion on foot. That is until they spot just the transportation they need. An ice cream truck. Paying the driver as if he were a taxi, Cyclops and Iceman hitch a ride to the mansion in the temperature-controlled car, a perfect environment for our frozen X-Man, who helps himself to a few chocolate pops along the way. Arriving at their school, Iceman and Cyclops join their fellow students as Professor X explains the purpose behind his urgent call. Projecting a mental image on a nearby wall, the professor tells his X-Men of the newest superhuman threat, the Vanisher, whose evil he had telepathically sensed, even from miles away. We see in the mental projection that the Vanisher, in a particularly gaudy costume, approached 2 New York City policemen earlier that day. The odd-looking villain asked the policeman where the city bank was and blatantly told them he was going to rob it. Thinking the Vanisher was nothing more than a crazed nut, the policeman escorted the villain to the bank, expecting to arrest him on the scene. There the Vanisher, in front of the officers, blatantly brandished a handgun and forced a teller to hand him over a large sum of money. It's at this point that the policemen began to take the Vanisher more seriously and pulled out their own revolvers to arrest him. Yet before they could lay a finger on the kooky villain, he amazingly disappeared out of thin air. And with that, Professor X ends his briefing and warns the X-Men that the Vanisher will be their next foe. Yet the immature Iceman gawks at the villain's so-called power, while confidently demonstrating his own by producing a flurry of ice pellets, which nearly hit his teammates. Professor X, always eager to test his students' abilities, orders Marvel Girl to subdue the out-of-control Iceman. The powerful telekinetic obliges and mentally rounds up Iceman's spent pellets and hurls them right back at him. Yet Iceman sees the attack coming and creates a sturdy shield of solid ice that deflects the pellets. Having both proven their abilities, Professor X orders Marvel Girl and Iceman to cease their fighting and for them and the rest of their teammates to head for the danger room, as the heroes need to ready their abilities not against themselves, but against the Vanishers. Thus we learn that the danger room is the name given to the large unfurnished chamber that the X-Men train in. Yet the danger room is actually home to many hidden traps and perils for the heroes to overcome. The Angel is the first up to train, as Professor X warns the high-flying X-Man of several missiles that he must dodge. Readily evading the first few, Professor X then challenges the Angel with a special missile that he commands him to catch as if it was the Vanisher. Angel strains his hardest to seize the tiny projectile, but ultimately fails in capturing it and is forced to land lest he completely wear himself out. Cyclops and Marvel Girl rush the exhausted Angel over to Professor X, who runs some diagnostics that show he is in good health, but simply lacks enough endurance, something he challenges the Angel to improve. Next up is the Beast, whose first obstacle is a pair of mechanical fists that suddenly spring up from under the floor. But the Beast, having encountered the fists many times before, sees them coming and is easily able to vault out of the way. Yet what the Beast doesn't expect is for his landing spot to be a trap itself, as only moments before his feet would have hit the ground, the floor panel disappears beneath him and sends the hero tumbling down a deep hole. The Beast just barely manages to break his fall by wedging himself within the hole, but struggles to muster enough strength to leap out of his trap. Straining his superhuman muscles to their absolute limits, the oversized X-Man does the seeming impossible and acrobatically escapes his trap. Yet having spent the last of his strength in the escape, the Beast is primed for an ungraceful landing back in the danger room. Thankfully, Marvel Girl steps in and telekinetically softens the blow. With his test over, Professor X commends the Beast on his progress, while Marvel Girl thanks the Professor for his wisdom in devising such challenging trials. Yet suddenly the issue shifts focus to the Vanisher, who has teleported into the Pentagon, headquarters of the United States Department of Defense in Washington, D.C. Teleporting past two guards and into a top-secret conference room, the Vanisher interrupts two generals as they comb over highly sensitive defense plans. Those plans are just what the villain is after, as he ominously warns the officers of his imminent return to steal them. The generals are left bewildered at the Vanisher's presence and demand to know how he was able to get past their guards. Thus the villain reveals that he is in fact a mutant and can effortlessly teleport himself anywhere he merely thinks of. And with that, the Vanisher ominously exits, leaving the astonished generals in fear of his incredible power, as they realize that if the villain had wanted to, he could have easily stolen the plans right then and there. Sometime later we see the Vanisher sitting smugly atop a makeshift throne, surrounded by a legion of the underworld's most vile crooks, all yearning to become a part of his crew. With a pompous attitude reserved for the most dastardly villains, the Vanisher agrees to employ the criminals and brags about the scale and magnitude of his unfolding scheme. Back at the danger room, we see Marvel Girl testing the strength of her telekinetic powers against an enormous red ball. Cyclops questions the safety of such a test, as he wonders if the mental strain of its great weight might be too much for Marvel Girl to handle. But Professor X disregards the concern, as safety means little against the necessity of intensive training. Yet Cyclops had cause for concern, as Marvel Girl begins vocally struggling to hold up the massive ball, and fears it will soon crush her. Thus Professor X ends in Cyclops, who blasts away the ball and saves a grateful Marvel Girl. In fact, the teenage hero is so grateful, she somehow ends up in the arms of her savior, although it's unclear if Cyclops picked her up or if she opted to jump into his arms. Nonetheless, a jealous Iceman chastises Cyclops for grandstanding, as he points out that any of the other X-Men could have saved Marvel Girl. Yet Iceman seemingly ignores the fact that it was Professor X who sent in Cyclops, so this outburst is really nothing more than an immature teenager throwing a fit. Somehow Professor X is able to calm Iceman down, and the issue jumps forward a few minutes as the telepath mentally contacts an FBI agent in Washington, D.C. Thanks to a special headband that magnifies his mental impulses, the FBI agent is able to telepathically speak to Professor X. It seems that the FBI had arranged for a mental meeting with the professor after learning that the Vanisher was a mutant, as Xavier is known, at least by the government, to be the foremost expert on mutants. Anyways, the FBI agent informs Professor X of the Vanisher's evil plot, at which point the professor ends the call and rushes to gather his X-Men. He orders them to get ready to depart for Washington, D.C. Thus the students realize they'll be facing off against the Vanisher, a prospect most of them seem excited for, as they still don't take the villain's threat seriously. In any case, the X-Men soon depart for Washington, D.C., this time in a military plane provided for them by the FBI. The issue then shifts focus back to the Pentagon, where 4 armed guards stand watch over a briefcase containing the defense plans. Yet the Vanisher teleports right onto the table where the plans lie, steals them, and befitting his name, vanishes before the guards can stop him. But instead of teleporting clean out of the Pentagon, the Vanisher reappears in a nearby hallway, where the guards from earlier manage to catch up to him and even tackle him. Yet once again the Vanisher escapes, and this time to the building steps, where each X-Men, except Angel, are there waiting for him. As a side note, Marvel Girl curiously declares that the Vanisher is indeed a mutant, as somehow she's able to sense it. Our first hint that the newest X-Men may have a few more tricks up her sleeve. Regardless, Angel then suddenly swoops in from behind the Vanisher and manages to hoist him up in the air before he has a chance to teleport away. In the air, Angel is able to wrestle free the stolen plans from the Vanisher's hands, which the Beast catches below. Yet the Vanisher escapes from the Angel nonetheless and suddenly reappears to once again steal the plans from a gloating Beast. Yet this game of hot potato continues as Cyclops blasts the briefcase out of the Vanisher's hands and into Marvel Girl's. With her telekinetic powers, Marvel Girl raises the plans high in the air, too high for the Vanisher to reach. But the daring villain was prepared for such a possibility and unveils a gun that emits sleeping gas, which he activates right into Marvel Girl's face. Knocking the hero out, the Vanisher then retrieves the plans and prepares to teleport away. Iceman desperately tries to freeze the Vanisher in place, but is ultimately too slow as the villain escapes in time. Faced with their first defeat, the X-Men regroup and take a humbling moment to reckon with their failure. Cyclops rebukes the overconfidence of both himself and his teammates. Marvel Girl admits that the team needs more training. And Beast especially mopes in how easily the Vanisher embarrassed him. Yet the villain embarrassed more than just the Beast, as we see the next day's paper chastise the X-Men for their failure. The public, who had seemingly been won over by the team's last adventure, thus start to turn on them and set into a panic. Back at the X-Mansion, the X-Men are huddled together in a small room. In its corner are Iceman and Angel, bickering and blaming each other for their failure, while Beast is still moping about and blaming himself. The only student whose mind seems to be set on the future is Cyclops, who is listening intently as a TV news bulletin announces that the Vanisher is ransoming the government for $10 million, lest he leak the stolen plans to foreign enemies of the United States. Yet Cyclops's concentration is interrupted as the bickering between the Angel and Iceman turns into a full-out brawl. Angel begins furiously flapping his wings, which produces a powerful gust of wind that knocks Iceman off his feet. But the ice-cold X-Man strikes back by freezing the Angel's wings solid. Thankfully, the Beast steps in to separate the two. Except that he starts angrily rebuking the Iceman himself. Cyclops then manages to carefully melt the ice off of Angel's wings, just as Professor X steps in to finally corral his students before tensions escalate any further. While the professor commends his X-Men for their relative level of success, especially considering their age and lack of experience, he's finally decided it's time for him to get involved personally. Thus he informs his X-Men that they will soon return to Washington, D.C., but this time he's coming along. But before he explains any more, the professor ushers his students to a nearby projector, where upon a wall he presents a film of the Vanisher, captured at a speed of 20,000 frames per second. Yet even this highly sophisticated camera struggles to capture the moment the Vanisher teleports away. Thus the professor has realized that brute strength alone cannot defeat such an unimaginably fast foe, and this is why he must accompany the X-Men to Washington, D.C. Yet before any more details can be shed, the issue jumps forward a day and many miles south. We see a White House staffer answer a high-priority call from Professor X, where he learns the nature of his plan and vows to relay it to the president himself. Thus we next see the X-Men some time later, waiting for the Vanisher on the White House lawn. As expected, the villain arrives, accompanied with a legion of goons and a readiness to receive his ransom money. But the Vanisher is not pleased with the X-Men's presence and demands the meddlesome team leave the scene. For a moment it seems that our super team is actually obliging the Vanisher's request as they seemingly begin to depart. Yet in reality, the heroes are simply making way for the wheelchair-bound Professor X. The professor warns the Vanisher of his incredible power and offers the villain a chance to surrender. Yet the villain assumes the professor to be nothing more than a defenseless human and swears vengeance on anyone who would dare threaten him. It's at this point that the professor reveals the true magnitude of his telepathic power, as without moving a muscle, he begins to manipulate the thoughts of the Vanisher, the one who is truly defenseless. Suddenly overwhelmed by feelings of dread and fear, the Vanisher desperately attempts to teleport away from Professor X. Yet the Vanisher finds that he has lost control of his power and begins to shrink in fear at the horror that the professor has implanted in his mind. The villain's misery soon ends though, as he suddenly finds himself an amnesiac with no recollection of recent events, his own powers, or even his own identity. Thus the Vanisher confusedly leaves the scene, not by teleporting, but simply on foot, as he must now reckon with his forgotten life. Bearing witness to the Vanisher's incredible defeat is the legion of goons he had assembled. A legion whose bewilderment has turned to anger, and who seek to crush the X-Men for destroying their ticket to endless wealth. The goons open fire on the heroes, but Iceman is narrowly able to create an impenetrable ice shield to protect Professor X. The Beast meanwhile lunges at a group of crooks, disarming them one by one with his inhuman agility, before toppling them over like dominoes with a well-aimed kick. The tumbling goons then fall over into a deep depression carved by Cyclops' optic beams, and which is covered by an ice cage courtesy of the frozen X-Men. Yet two goons manage to break off from the others and confront Marvel Girl. Her lack of outward powers lead them to foolishly declare her a weakling. But of course Marvel Girl is just the opposite. She proves as much as she telekinetically compels the crooks' weapons to turn on the criminals, forcing them to surrender. Still, a few more goons remain, yet seeing the fate of their peers, try to flee the scene. The Angel notices the three crooks, swoops in from above, and takes them down, even dodging a few bullets in the process. With the last of the goons defeated, government security arrives within minutes to arrest them. The issue subsequently ends as the X-Men marvel at their mentor's effortless defeat of the Vanisher, an opportunity the professor takes to remind his students that the greatest power of all is that of the human mind. That concludes Uncanny X-Men Issue 2 and another episode of the Classic Comic Archive. But as always, I would like to offer a brief review of this issue. Overall, I thought that this was an underwhelming follow-up to a solid series opener. While I had fun with specific moments, I couldn't help but feel that the villain plot was a rehash of last issues. Both revolve around an evil mutant who steals something from the government, and the X-Men are forced to intervene and save the day. This premise worked well enough with a villain as menacing as Magneto, but not for the Vanisher. Was I the only one wondering why the government didn't just put the plans in a locked container too small for him to teleport into? Or how come they didn't just move the plans somewhere else? It's not as though the issue established the Vanisher having some sort of tracking power. When solutions so simple and obvious can completely derail the Vanisher's evil scheme, it's hard to take him seriously. Plot holes aside, this issue did have some charm, as it's always fun to see the X-Men in the danger room and Professor X get involved in the action. Yet ultimately the story fell flat for me, and I'm not surprised that the Vanisher never became an iconic X-Men villain. In any case, let me know what you thought of this issue and the video, and feel free to suggest other classic comics for me to cover. Thanks for watching.